I'm going to be taking you underwater, talking about finding the oldest wreck in the Swan River. So this is something that we got out there a few months ago now, and it's something we're continuing to work on. I'm an archaeologist. I'm from the Western Australian Museum, and particularly I'm a maritime archaeologist. So we're particularly interested in human stories, and we're interested in them in relation to the ocean. So anything underwater. This includes shipwrecks and submerged landscapes. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Noongar land and pay my respects to the elders, past and present. And I also want to just note that the seabed data that we're talking about today really can contribute to this story in a lot of ways. In that we're here on the coast, but back a very long time ago, land extended much, much further out. You could see in the Ice Age, when Aboriginal people were here, you could walk out to Wodjima, Rottnest Island. And so Noongar country extends well past the lands that we're used to thinking about, all the way into sea country in a variety of ways. And this is one of them that data can speak to. And so all of these beautiful places are still very much alive cultural spaces. Today, though, I'm going to be talking about the shipwrecks that are sitting on these ancient landscapes. And these marks are all marks in our WA Museum shipwreck database. So you can see right off Rottnest, Wodjima, there's the Rottnest Deepwater Graveyard in hundreds of metres of water with a lot of ships dumped there. There's a bunch of wrecks around Rottnest, there's a few around Fremantle, obviously as a major port, and then there's a lot up the Swan River. And we've found about 391 of these. That's the number that we've dived and recorded and actually looked at. But there are around 1,800 in our database of ships that were lost at some point. And so some of these will still be sitting on the seafloor and some of them will be taken up and they've been salvaged, but there are certainly more to find. And they're protected under legislation. So part of the work that we do at the museum is to try to record and understand these sites. And to do that, we obviously need a pretty good understanding of them, right, in order to manage them. And so we've got a variety of acts, and we're updating the State Act at the moment to try to bring it in line with the Federal Act, which basically means anything over 75 years that's underwater should be protected. This is the international standard. Of course, though, protection is only as useful as what you know about the site. You can't protect it without understanding it. And so this is what some of the wrecks look like in the Perth metro region. This is just off Karnak Island, Sepia, and you can see that despite being underwater for over 100 years, there's still plenty of structure, there's a big anchor on this, and that there's still beer bottles sitting on these sites that are definitely something that people could take if they were so inclined. That's obviously very illegal, please don't do that, but it's something that we can do, people can do, and you can only know that that is happening and protect those sites in a way if you know how many bottles have disappeared over the last few years. And sites change really, really rapidly. So this is a site up north in Yanchep, just on the beach, and you can see the difference between a summer and winter configuration, where winter comes through, strips all the sand off the site and reveals them. So this is not monitoring that we can do just once. We have to go back to these sites over and over and over again. Now, we're traditionally used to doing this work in these beautiful crystal clear waters off the Abrolhos Islands. So this is Zeewick, a Dutch ship, and you can see for miles. It's absolutely beautiful. It's very, very shallow. And this is the sort of recording we can do. So despite the fact we're working in the swell zone, we can use photogrammetry to go over this site and record it in great detail. You can see all of the cannon and anchors and ballast that were left by Dutch people more than 300 years ago. And this is another ship, 400 years old now, that you can see beautiful crystal clear water. We can take a lot of images and we can manage it and get really nice configuration of the sites. However, I am doing a fair bit of work now in the Swan River, which looks a lot different to the nice, beautiful water. I'm trying not to become a Swan River guy, so please don't remember me as that. But the Blackwall Reach is it's one of the deepest parts of the river, and this is what it looks like in the middle of the day. When the water runs over the top of it, it's tannin, it's like coffee, and it just cuts out all the light. So this is a car, you can see the headlights sticking up and the wheels being dumped on the bottom of the river. Not quite a shipwreck, but it's definitely a wreck. And so the way we approach this is we look through our archives, and a lot of this is formatted as a data. So we have the WA Museum Shipwrecks database, where we have the lat longs, we have information on the length, the tonnage, all of that about the ship. And there's community organisations that also have this data. We have the Maritime Archaeological Association, which has this database, and we also then have things that aren't formatted as data. Publications like this one from the 80s, Colin Scrimshaw wrote about all of the wrecks he could find in the Swan River that were over a certain length. I think over, 12 metres long and before 1945. So an attempt to document everything. And of course, that's where GIS comes in. So once we start to compile all of this information, this is the pattern you can see. In the deeper parts of the river, there are plenty of wrecks that are probably more recent and they've been dumped. But even further down near Fremantle, you've got a variety of kind of early industrial ships, and even up in the Canning River, you've got some older wrecks there. And so this is what, a lot of this talk was developed for my students, my maritime archaeology students, just showing them how you get all of this data from different databases and different publications, and you start to make sense of it. Now what you'll notice there is that there are big parts of the river where we don't really have many shipwrecks in, we don't really know anything about them. But the ones we do know look like this. So this is ALC 40, it's a World War II barge, it's actually two barges stuck together, and it's just, it's probably a relatively important part of history if we are thinking about World War II, and that is just coming into that time when it can be protected by heritage legislation. But it's just sitting on the bottom of the river in relatively good state. And we are doing this sort of monitoring to go. 10 years ago now, we did photogrammetry, and this is what it looked like. And we can compare that in detail because we have such good photogrammetric models that we can see the sites are remarkably stable. These will probably last for quite some time. But there is still some challenges, and people will anchor on these sites, and so you can see right up at the bow there is some small deck collapse. And so even a big, stable hunk of metal sitting on the seabed will slowly change. The other story that's often told by the river is that this is an industrial landscape. So for a very long time, this was used as kind of the main thoroughfare of Earth before the railway lines were built and the roads were built. And so this carted some things across to Wajamat Rottnest Island during the war, would cart things up and down the river, and then it was just sunk at some point. Now, to bring us to how we actually go about finding shipwrecks. I want to shout out to the WA bathymetry portal run by the Department of Transport, where they've done a great job of putting out all of this seabed data that's been collected for various reasons, primarily navigation, to just try to get that data out there so people can use it for other purposes. Now, one of these pieces of data was collected, I think now more than a decade ago, that is mapping the Swan River and looking where all of the sites are that ships could run into. So you can see the main channel that's running through that is occasionally dredged. You can also see all of these little pockmarks sitting in the seabed. And so if I take you up to Mosman Bay, where all of those wrecks were before, you can actually see there's pockmarks, and they match pretty exactly to what we've recorded as divers in the river. You can clearly see these are shipwrecks. And so when we bring that into GIS, we can also see that there are other features. So basically every wreck that we know about, you can see on this resolution of multibeam data, which was not collected for that purpose, but it works. But then there are other features that we aren't on any database, but that look suspiciously shipwreck-like. And so this is what we've done. It's very, very straightforward GIS task. It's building a database, going through and collecting information about whether or not there's scour, erosion around these things sitting in the seabed, how long they are to help us prioritize. And then you get things that look like this, right? So this is a nice big 20-meter long oval sitting in 14 meters depth, just off Point Walter, in an area where there's no shipwrecks known about that we have recorded. And yet it looks relatively suspicious. So we went, okay, well, it's about 20 meters long. That matches that barge that I showed you before. It could well be something. And so the next step there, once you've compiled that database, is to go and do some remote sensing. So this is side scan sonar. And this is what you can see when you go directly over the site on your boat. You can see the scale there. It's only 20 meters of data that we can collect. So really, the advantage of having this huge open data is that you can drop yourself right on top of these things. Since we announced this and this information has been out with pretty much exactly where it is, people still kind of email the museum and going, where is this? We can't find it. Because it's so hard to search in these places, and yet there is data out there for more than a decade that can just drop you straight on it. So this is what it all looks like. And this is what we see when we get down to the bottom. So you can see it's very, very murky, but it's very obviously a shipwreck. And so we kind of swim along, we just do this initial reconnaissance and go, a lot of these are not this exciting. We get down and there's like a bunch of tires on the bottom of the river or whatever. Great, okay. Whereas this was very obviously a shipwreck. It's got this quite big stem post and stern post on either end, which tells us it's a big barge. And we use, obviously, photogrammetry to image this wreck. We take thousands of images, it can kind of clear away all the water, and you get a really good sense of the construction. And this is in fantastic condition. It's clearly timber. There's a whole bunch of limestone sitting in the middle of this, but there's no engines on either side. So it tells us this is probably an unpowered vessel that's being towed along. And you can see some infrastructure there for something that you tie things to in order to tow it. And so this is what it looks like when we, again, bring all that data together and put it into a composite. You can get a really clear length of the vessel, and you can get a sense of what it is, so we can start scouring the archives to see what it could be. Then our next step, once we've found them, is to identify it. This is the fun part for us, and we raised an artifact off this, a demijohn, a jar about this big, that has J&W Bateman written on the top of it. So this is a spirit merchant's, and it was a hardware store for a very long time. So if you're out having lunch just down on Henry Street, you can actually walk past this J&W Bateman building, and that was made for, this demijohn was made for them. Doesn't really narrow down the date though, unfortunately. They were operated from basically when the colony started up until the 1980s, I think. Could be any time, but it looks early 20th century. What does narrow it down is also this amazing just sheer data work that's been done by Trove in the National Library, getting all of these newspapers online that you can search through. And we were able to find that a flat owned by Alfred Dearden sunk just across from Point Resolution, which is exactly where we found this, in however many feet of water, a few metres off what we found, and it was heavily laden with stone, which is exactly what we see on the seabed. And so all of this identification is only possible because the Department of Transport released a whole bunch of interesting data. We were able to go down and track that, and then we were able to compare it to a whole bunch of opened newspapers. And it lets us now tell this story in the museum about how the river was used to move cargo, and it tells us a lot of the quarries that were used in Rocky Bay, which is where this would have been coming from, were just absolutely mined for limestone that was used to build roads all across Perth City. So in this case, Alfred Dearden had a contract to build the roads around the Perth railway station using this limestone. So it gives you an idea of how much limestone you see around Perth. This is probably how it got there, and this is the places that it comes from. Now this isn't just a one-off, we've got another one. I can't really say anything about this one, but you can see nice big ship shape, and when you dive, again, beautiful visibility, you can see this. So we'll get to work, we'll figure out what that is, and I'll report back later. Now to finish up, I think I've got a few minutes, this is some work beyond the river that we're doing in a similar vein. So my colleague Aurora Philpin has compiled this map of the Rottnest Deepwater Graveyard, where the government intentionally dumped a lot of ships over about 100 years. They're in very deep water, but we're working with some of these technical divers who are using rebreathers and mixed gases, diving down to up to 114 metres underwater and doing this same process of photogrammetry. It's quite impressive work. They're spending 10 minutes at the bottom. It takes them 2 hours to come back up safely with decompression time. But within those 10 minutes, they're able to get us this fantastic data. So this is, again, another vessel from the war. We're actually able to talk to someone who was on this, who told us he was able to point to where he used to sleep on this 3D model. We're trying to identify some sites. So this is probably a coal hulk, but we haven't been able to identify that. Whereas this one is one we have been able to identify by looking at the amount of decks that it has, the length it has. We can compare that to our databases and go, this is CISA. It's a coal hulk that was used in Fremantle Harbour for quite some time. It tells a story about that coal industry. And the reason I mention that in terms of data is that there isn't much open data in this place, but we are starting some work to try to share a lot of data between groups that have been doing magnetometry searches, multibeam searches, and diving. And this is some early results of that. So just yesterday, Rexploration announced that they found another ship in just 45 metres in the Rottnest Deepwater Graveyard. We don't know what it is yet, but the only reason it was found is because someone who'd done, Alistair Cook, who'd done a lot of magnetometry survey, had a good relationship with these guys and was able to share that data. And so we're now working to really open it up and make sure any data that we have at the museum is as open as it can possibly be, so people, my students or whoever, anyone in this room can look through it and start to make these same discoveries. It's not hard, it just takes an eye to be looking through it and finding it. So thank you very much.